Renting is just throwing money away. That's the line that's echoed endlessly across dinner tables, in Facebook comments, and from the loudest voices in personal finance. But what if that advice is outdated, or just plain wrong? In today's housing market, with sky-high interest rates, fluctuating home values, and skyrocketing living costs, buying a home might not be the obvious win it once seemed. Let's actually run the numbers, real math, not emotional reasoning, and see which choice really makes more financial sense. The real cost of buying a home. So here's what usually happens. Someone decides to buy a home. They look at the mortgage payment and think, hey, it's about the same as rent, maybe even cheaper. Why not build equity while living in a place? It sounds smart on the surface, but that monthly payment? It's not the whole picture, not even close. Start with the mortgage itself. In the early years of a 30-year fixed mortgage, a huge chunk of the payment goes straight to interest, not to building equity. In fact, for the first decade, homeowners are mostly paying the bank for the privilege of borrowing money, not actually buying their house. So when people say they're paying themselves through a mortgage, it's only partially true. In the beginning, they're mostly paying interest. And then there's property tax, a forever cost. It never goes away. Even when the mortgage is paid off, the tax man still comes knocking, year after year. It's like renting from the government. Let's not forget maintenance. Things break, roofs wear out, pipes leak, appliances die. On average, maintenance runs about 1% to 2% of the home's value annually. That's $5,000 to $10,000 a year on a $500,000 home every single year. Homeowners insurance and HOA fees, add those to the pile. Insurance typically runs about 0.5% of the home's value per year, and HOA fees vary, but some neighborhoods demand several $100s monthly just for lawn care and pool access. And finally, the sneakiest cost of all, closing costs. Between buying and eventually selling a home, expect to lose 6% to 10% of the home's value to transaction fees. That's $30,000 to $50,000 gone over the life cycle of homeownership, vanished. So when looking at buying a home, don't just see a mortgage payment. See interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, fees, and the giant dent made by closing costs. All of these are unrecoverable, meaning they don't build wealth. They don't increase equity. They're just costs. And most of them are quietly draining your finances while giving off the illusion of long-term gain. That monthly number on a mortgage calculator feels comforting until real life kicks in. That's when the dishwasher fails during a holiday weekend, or the air conditioning unit quits during a heat wave, or a pipe bursts and floods the basement. These aren't rare events, they're expected. Every year brings a new to-do list and a new expense to match. And while some maintenance adds value, a lot of it doesn't. Fixing a leaky faucet doesn't raise your home's price, it just keeps it livable. Property taxes are another silent killer. They rise with home values, they fluctuate with local budgets, and they're completely outside your control. Homeowners' insurance premiums are also creeping up in many areas, especially where climate risks are increasing. Wildfires, floods, hurricanes. Owning means you carry that burden. HOA fees can be unpredictable too. Special assessments, surprise increases, those are real risks, especially in aging developments with deferred upkeep. And closing costs are almost always underestimated. It's not just commissions, it's title insurance, inspection fees, transfer taxes, legal paperwork, and a dozen other nickel and dime charges. All of this creates friction, financial drag that slows down wealth building, even when home values are rising. And the equity you do build, it's locked in the walls. You can't spend it at the grocery store. You can't access it easily without borrowing against it. Home ownership is often sold as stability, but it's also a long-term financial contract with a lot of fine print. It's not just a payment plan, it's a partnership with risk, responsibility, and relentless expenses. Even if everything goes smoothly, the first 5 to 10 years are usually a grind. You're just trying to break even while juggling taxes, repairs, and rising costs. That doesn't mean buying is always bad. It just means it's rarely as clean-cut as people make it out to be. And without clear eyes on the full financial picture, that shiny homeowner label can come with a heavy price tag. So the next time someone says, you're just throwing money away on rent, it's worth asking, what are they throwing away every month too? Because when all those unrecoverable costs are added up, the truth becomes a lot harder to ignore. The real costs of renting a home. Now renting, let's be honest, rent is 100% unrecoverable. There's no asset at the end, no equity, no payoff. But here's the twist. Renting is simple. Renters pay a set monthly cost, maybe toss in a small amount for renter's insurance, usually less than $20 a month, and that's it. There are no property taxes, no surprise $9,000 roof replacements, no emergency HVAC failures, no HOA fees, no closing costs when it's time to leave, and best of all, no market risk. If the housing market crashes, renters walk away unscathed. Sure, renters don't benefit from rising home values. They miss out on appreciation, but they also skip the volatile costs of ownership. The biggest drawback? Renters don't build equity. They don't capture any increase in property value, and their rent might increase year after year, depending on the market. But simplicity has its benefits, especially when the savings are invested wisely. Investing the difference. Let's run the real-world numbers. Imagine a $500,000 home. The monthly cost to own, including mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, comes out to around $3,300. That's assuming a 6.75% interest rate, 20% down, and average fees and costs across the board. Now compare that to renting a comparable home for $2,200 a month. That's a monthly difference of about $1,100. Here's the key question. What happens if someone rents the $2,200 property and invests that extra $1,100 every single month? If that money goes into a broad market stock index like the S&P 500, historically returning about 8 to 10% annually, things start to shift dramatically. In just 10 years, that investment account could be worth over $200,000. In 20 years, it could be well into the mid-six figures, and in 30 years, it can reach well into seven figures. Meanwhile, the homeowner does build equity, but it grows slowly, especially in the first decade, and that's before accounting for the six-figure down payment that could have been invested instead. This is where the math starts to surprise people. Over shorter time frames, less than 7 years, renting and investing, the difference often comes out ahead. Buying tends to win only over much longer horizons, and even then, the margin is often smaller than expected. And here's what makes it even more interesting. Compound interest does most of the heavy lifting. The longer that $1,100 gets invested, the more powerful it becomes. The first few years might not look impressive. Growth feels slow at the start, but as time stacks up, so does the momentum. What starts as a few hundred in monthly gains can snowball into thousands. By year 15, that renter might already be looking at a six-figure cushion. By year 25, they could be approaching $1 million portfolio, all while avoiding closing costs, skipping emergency maintenance calls, and keeping their financial life far more liquid. And that down payment, $100,000 in this case, never left the investment account. It's working too. Assuming the same return rate, that money alone could grow to over $760,000 in 30 years without a single additional deposit. So now the picture starts to shift. Renting isn't a passive lifestyle. It can be an active financial strategy, especially when markets are high, interest rates are elevated, and the housing price to rent ratio is out of balance. The flexibility to rent and invest the gap doesn't just preserve capital, it can create serious wealth. And it's not just about returns either, it's also about peace of mind. A renter who's investing consistently has liquidity, options, security. Meanwhile, the homeowner is locked into a mortgage, locked into a location, locked into a long list of monthly costs that don't go away even if the market crashes. And if they sell too soon, those closing costs can wipe out a huge chunk of any equity they've built, assuming the market has even gone up at all. Over long time horizons, ownership can still come out ahead, but it has to overcome all those early costs. It's like running a race where one runner starts 50 yards behind. The break-even point often sits around year 8 or 9. Before that, the renter-investor is often ahead. After that, the homeowner may catch up, but only if the market behaves. And that's the piece people miss. Buying is a bet, a big one. It's a bet on the market, the property, the location, and personal life stability. Renting and investing, that's a bet too. But it's spread across hundreds of companies in the market, not just one building on one street. And it comes with far less friction. If something changes, career, family, goals, the renter can pivot without untangling a web of closing contracts, realtor fees, or listing photos. This isn't about saying one path is right for everyone. It's about recognizing that the math behind renting can be far more favorable than it's usually given credit for. Because when cash flow is optimized and investment habits are strong, renting doesn't just keep pace, it can lead the way. The 5% rule. To simplify this entire debate, financial researcher Benjamin Felix introduced what's known as the 5% rule. The idea is straightforward. Home ownership comes with about 5% per year in unrecoverable costs. That includes roughly 1% for property taxes, 1% for maintenance, and about 3% for the cost of capital, which includes mortgage interest and the opportunity cost of tying up a down payment. Take a $500,000 home and multiply it by 5%. That's $25,000 per year in unrecoverable costs. Divide that by 12, and the monthly number comes out to roughly $2,083. If a comparable rental costs less than that amount, renting is often the better financial choice. If it costs more, buying may start to make more sense, especially for someone planning to stay put long term. This framework works because it compares apples to apples. It focuses only on money that disappears either way, rather than assuming that a mortgage payment is automatically wealth building. It also brings hidden costs into the light, costs that many buyers overlook when calculating what they can afford. Most mortgage calculators don't include things like roof replacements or the loss of investment returns on your down payment. The 5% rule slices through the emotional haze with something tangible. It helps people stop asking, should I buy a house? And start asking, what am I really paying to live here? Unlike the old rent versus mortgage payment comparison, this method recognizes that equity isn't built instantly, and certainly not without friction. It also adjusts for the fact that homes don't just sit quietly appreciating. They require upkeep, they need insurance, they carry risk. That 5% figure is a realistic representation of those ongoing commitments. It's not a rule carved into stone, but rather a guideline that offers clarity when the emotions of homeownership start taking over the numbers. And it works in reverse too. Let's say rent is $3,000 a month. Multiply that by 12 and then divide by 5%. That tells you a $720,000 house would generate roughly the same level of unrecoverable costs annually. So if you're considering buying a $600,000 house instead of continuing to rent for $3,000, the math says buying might actually be cheaper in that scenario, especially over time. This isn't about saying renting is always better or worse. It's about having a consistent method to compare your options without relying on gut feelings or outdated advice. It puts renters on equal footing with buyers. It gives them the power to say, I've run the numbers, and this is the smarter play right now. That's empowering, because for years the narrative has been one-sided. Renting has been labeled as wasting money when in reality, it's just a different form of spending. A car payment doesn't build equity, but people still make them because they value mobility. Renting is no different, except the cost can be lower and the freedom higher. The 5% rule doesn't ignore equity buildup, it simply frames it in context. Home equity grows slowly and comes with strings attached. What the rule does best is highlight trade-offs. It says, yes, you can build equity, but it might cost you far more than you think to do so. If the rent you're paying is significantly under the 5% threshold, you're likely doing just fine financially. You're not throwing money away, you're saving on taxes, on maintenance, on stress. And if you're disciplined enough to invest the difference, the long-term payoff can rival, if not exceed, the return on owning real estate. People often forget that homes are not just assets, they're also liabilities. The 5% rule forces that duality into view. It creates a framework where emotional decisions can be balanced with financial ones, where dream homes are seen for what they are, investments with pros and cons. It also discourages rushed decisions. When the numbers tell a different story than the societal pressure, it's worth pausing. So whether you're debating your first home or considering downsizing, running the 5% rule math can provide a surprisingly clear answer. It simplifies a complicated question and grounds it in numbers that reflect reality, not just tradition. And in today's market, where interest rates are high, inflation is sticky, and volatility is constant, simplicity and clarity might just be the best assets of all. Opportunity cost and flexibility. There's another factor that rarely gets priced correctly, and that's flexibility. Buying a home ties up cash and locks someone into a specific location. Selling takes time. Moving is expensive. Job opportunities can be missed because relocating isn't simple. Renting keeps options open. Careers can change. Cities can change. Life can change. And the money that would have gone into a down payment can stay invested, compounding quietly in the background. That flexibility has real financial value even though it doesn't show up on a mortgage statement. Renting is not throwing money away. It's paying for housing, just like owning is. The difference is that renting is more transparent about its costs. Buying a house is often a lifestyle decision first and a financial decision second. It tends to make the most sense for those planning to stay in one place for 10 years or more and who value stability over mobility. For everyone else, renting and investing the difference isn't a fallback option. It's a legitimate math-backed path to building wealth. If this perspective added clarity to the rent versus buy decision, share it with someone who's wrestling with the same choice. And for more finance content grounded in real numbers instead of old advice, subscribe and check out what's coming next.